Welcome to Settling the Score.
Okay, we are back, and not only is audio finally under control, but we are sounding, I think, kind of fire now.
We're sounding a lot better than we were before.
We've got the new mics set up. We have the boom arm drilled into the desk so that it'll actually stay where it needs to be. We got some real nice old school 1930s, 1940s style pop filters, so you can hear the P's, but they don't pop.
Yeah, this will be a really nice way for us to see the level up in our equipment mid-episode, because people are going to be listening to this, and then all of a sudden, it's going to sound a little bit better.
Yeah, so it's been about 4 or 5 days since we recorded that last part of the episode. So now, as promised, we are going to take a closer look at the Big Four, as I've creatively dubbed them. There's a reason they're the Big Four, and that is because they are the ancient cultures that we have records of having classical music traditions. So other ancient cultures probably did as well, but we just don't have enough information on them. These 4 cultures that we are about to name are all very well represented in the historical record. They all have quite different traditions. They're all fascinating, and they'll give us some context for our own classical music. Just a couple of points about this. We're not going to dive into the definition of classical music just yet, because we're actually going to save that conversation for the beginning of our final background episode when we get to the context of Western classical music. So as we dive into these Big Four of musical antiquity, we should bear in mind that the academic situation is quite similar to what we saw in our look at musical prehistory. Specifically, these areas of inquiry are, despite minimal university coverage, really exploding right now. They're transforming from semi-dormant specialist fields to genuinely, I won't say well understood areas of music history, but people who are doing this stuff are finding things out that we really didn't know was even possible. We're getting to a point where we can reconstruct a lot, let's put it that way. So without any further ado, the Big Four are
Ancient Sumer, Ancient Egypt, Ancient India, Ancient China.
That's right, and we have decided that this half of the episode is going to take us up to ancient Egypt, and then we're going to cut it off, as we mentioned in our update, and then jump right back in next week with India and China. So, without further ado, let's talk a little bit about these traditions as a whole. First of all, as I mentioned at the end of last episode, 2 of these traditions, the Chinese and the Indian, have remained vibrant and living traditions from the time of their inception. But the deep roots of these ancient traditions are actually coming into better understanding as well. Then we have 2 other traditions, the ones we will be looking at in this episode, which are ancient Sumer and Egypt. These are dead traditions. What I mean by that is we've lost the cultural link. We lost the societies, the cultures disappeared, and so the music that they created has not come down to us. As you can imagine, it's much harder to reconstruct these genuinely lost musical traditions than the ones that have carried on to this day. The ones that have carried on to this day, we can kind of make educated guesses about what their earliest forms would have sounded like, you know?
Exactly.
Because we have something to go by. We can work with what we have now and trace the evolution back. Mm-hmm. But when you have something that's not here, you have to make it be here in the first place.
Yeah.
And try to guess what it was like when it really was here.
Yeah, so, deductive reasoning.
Deductive reasoning, yeah. So here we go.
The birth of classical music.
Put bluntly, the earliest classical music was the music of the ruling class. As the priesthood and nobility developed, priests and nobles emerged as the educated class. And the whole notion of education is that you're being taught stuff. And one of the things that you were being taught in all these ancient societies was music, because music was closely connected to communicating with the gods and with temple rituals. And it was also closely connected with understanding the cosmos, as we're going to get to when we hit. Oh, we'll get to that in a second. I don't want to spoil it. So while emergent societies would have had vibrant popular music traditions too, and in fact the popular music traditions would be older than the classical music ones, we really don't get too much information on that. We're going to get information about music being made by the people who rule, because they got the pens, as if you will. They got the stylists, right?
They get to write the rules.
They get to write the rules, and they get to write the stories. And anyway, they're the people that matter. The nice thing about ancient Sumer, though, which will be our first stop, is that there does appear to be some overlap where skilled common musicians could sometimes find their way into these elite circles and maybe even get access to this education. But we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Ancient Sumer.
What?
Ancient Sumer.
Oh, you mean people with the world's oldest classical music tradition?
I mean, I could tell you, but I'd have to take over your job.
Ooh, you want to wing it for an episode? Tell me about ancient Sumer. What do you think ancient Sumerian classical music sounded like?
Very summery, very about warm months. You know, a lot about big flowing dresses, running around in the sunshine, things like that. That's what the summer people were about.
Right?
The
Sumerians, right?
Yeah, the Sumerians. I'm just trying to summarize the Sumerians.
Very good. This is very good. Well, so I'm going to tell you, the Sumerians had a neighboring people called the Sumerians, and they invented recorded history. What do you think their music would have been?
Very old. Very old. Very original, too.
Yep.
That may be the only original thought that ever happened with recorded music in history. The first one.
But that might only be that way because the other, 295,000 years of human history we just don't get to know about. So your buddy Ugg from last time is like, I wrote that.
Right, yeah, exactly. Why didn't I think to write it down? Oh, that's right. We don't have a written language yet.
And I just kept spending all my time with those wonderful mushrooms. I just never really got around to it.
Yeah, we were having too much fun dancing in the full moonlight.
Yep, And we had a big old supply of, back in those days, we had this big old running horde of bison. It was food for miles. You didn't have to do all this farming crap.
Yeah, you follow the bison and you get those magical mushrooms.
Yep, that's all you need.
Bison meat and mushrooms. That's all you need to get ahead in life.
A nice bison mushroom soup.
Yeah, bison magic mushroom soup. Dude, this is not the Joe Rogan podcast, okay?
We've already talked about this.
This is a classical music podcast.
We already talked about this in the last episode. Oh my God. Okay. Well, let's get into it, shall we?
Yes, we shall.
Okay. All right. So let's talk a little bit about ancient Sumer, also known as ancient Sumeria. There are some differences, but for our purposes, we're just going to use those names interchangeably.
Sumerian timeline, 4th millennium BCE.
Ancient Sumer comes into being as a bunch of city-states under a single hierarchy that are nonetheless fully self-reliant and more or less independent. A big part of this had to do with their ability to maintain complicated irrigation systems alongside the not one, but two rivers that they had access to, the Tigris and Euphrates. So basically what you're dealing with is you've got a bunch of cities that each have their own city king. Then you've got a king over top of them all.
Yeah.
What would later in ancient Persia evolve into this king of kings concept.
Yeah.
The king who is king over the kings.
The original pyramid scheme.
And we've been buying into it ever since.
Mm-hmm.
So, as I said, each city was built around a temple to a specific god or goddess. So each city had their own patron deity. And this is where we get the term Baal or Baal, which you'll see in the Bible. Baal just simply means the lord of the city. The human ruler of the city was also a high priest. So those roles were united. They were going to be a royal person and a high priest. Their job was to run things for the deity and make sure that they were happy. So they had to have all those different aspects covered, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, you know the famous Epic of Gilgamesh?
Yeah.
Gilgamesh was one of those priest kings.
Okay.
Yeah. And the reason we know all of this and don't have to speculate about sacred vultures is because at the end of the millennium, some smartass accountant developed writing, reasoning that it would be a great way to keep track of who owed him what, and kick-started recorded history as a happy side effect. One of those spandrel things we were talking about a few episodes ago.
Mm-hmm.
You remember that?
Yep. And one of my favorite things, sorry to interrupt here, but my favorite thing about human writing throughout all of history is the oldest tablet that we have human writing of that we have been able to decipher is in fact a complaint about the quality of goods that were shipped to somebody. And this is from about 5,000 years ago. Somebody complained about the quality of goods shipped to them for their work site, and that is the oldest recording we have of human writing that we've been able to decipher anyways.
Well, that's just it, is that the oldest human writing was developed for business purposes.
Yep.
And then it was just like, oh, well, you know, we can do all sorts with this.
Yep.
Anyway, though, as soon as people realized they could record language and ideas with symbols, they had all sorts of things to say. mostly about the gods and priest kings and all, but also mathematics, astronomy, magic, medicine, and music. And of course, as we were just discussing, commercial invoices and receipts. They wrote lots of those.
Yes, they did.
They sure did. And look, dude, it's kind of wild because we have about 100,000 surviving documents from ancient Sumeria.
Wow.
We have a lot.
That's a lot.
Like I said, there's a lot more than people realize.
100,000 documents have survived all those years. That's incredible.
Like I said, once we got to writing, we had a lot to say. So, hit it.
3rd millennium BCE.
Now, this is when things really start popping in terms of the tangible evidence for music making. So we start seeing the first lyres in the Mesopotamian musical record, which is significant because Mesopotamian music theory, yes, the ancient Mesopotamians had music theory, and we know about it, and it's amazing, and we're going to talk about it in a couple of minutes. But ancient Mesopotamian music theory seems to be derived from the strings and tuning of the lyre itself. So this instrument is like really at the core of it, and also other instruments too, but especially the lyre. Like I said, more on that soon. Speaking of lyres,
I was just thinking that, dude. I was just thinking that too.
I was like, I'm not even going to say it.
Just politicians.
Yeah, politicians. We won't mention the one we just mentioned. Politicians, yes. Okay, but anyways, speaking of lyres, Lyre, the 5,000-year-old Sumerian silver lyre of along with several other musical instruments like the golden lyre of was unearthed in southern Iraq in the 1920s by the British archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley. Now, we're going to take a look and a listen to the silver lyre of not but you know And for our friends over at Primetime Podcast, that's not
Have to make a distinction about it.
Don't worry, you can make fun of our American accents too. We love British accents, so at least I do.
Oh, I love British accents so much.
Yeah.
And I love when British people make fun of American accents and they just cut away from their British accent and then they do an American accent. That's when I really get to understand how goofy the American accent is.
Oh, dude, the fact that we pronounce our R's so hard just makes British people laugh their asses off. It's like, we all sound like pirates to British people.
Yep.
We all sound like folks from the West Midlands, which is basically like we all sound like folks from Alabama. No offense to our Alabama listeners. I'm sure we got plenty of them. Sweet home, baby. Sweet home. Okay, this is the silver lyre of Look at this beautiful thing.
Oh, that is absolutely beautiful. Look at the craftsmanship on whatever's on the left side there with the bull's head with the horns. Like, that's fantastic. Multiple pieces of wood there. Oh, I love those tuning pegs at the top. That's an interesting way to tune.
Yup.
I can see exactly how it is. You twist them sideways to tighten the tension on the knot and then lock it in with the rope itself.
They've got
that is so cool.
It's the ancestor of the locking nut bridge.
Yeah, the OG locking nut bridge. That's so cool.
Thank you, Sumerian.
Thank you, Sumerians.
Thanks, Sumerians. Yeah, it's so cool. And obviously, we have all this stuff linked. As always, we always give you guys tons of links. You know that. We give you lots of link love because we love you. And obviously, there are other lyres here, and we'll talk a little bit about them soon. But here is that silver lyre of reconstructed. This is not the original, but it is reconstructed down to the detail, as you can see.
Man, that is a beautiful instrument. was fantastic. One thing that really stands out to me about this particular stringed instrument is this is the oldest of the stringed instruments of this type.
Yeah, I'm not sure what the very oldest lyre is, but it could be. There might be some older than this, but this is the oldest one that's at this level of sophistication.
Exactly. And even though there's only 11 strings on this instrument, this person is playing way more than just 11 plain tones. For anyone just listening, they were performing a technique known as a pinch harmonic on multiple parts of multiple strings. And just the fact that they knew about those then is so impressive to me.
Well, they had more time on their hands to actually think about these things and just mess with stuff, you know. That was the first thing that jumped out to me, too. And the thing that struck me the most about those harmonics is how much they actually remind me of, like, really nice harmonics on a clean electric guitar sound.
Exactly. Like, that's what it reminded me of as well.
Like, I was actually getting vibes of like, wow, you can actually do that without electrification. That sounds so guitar-like and so electric guitar-like when he plays those. Yep. But yet it sounds acoustic.
Yeah.
Like, you can clearly hear the difference.
I've seen people do that technique on acoustic guitars, and it sounds almost exactly like I just heard from this audio clip.
It's neat because the performer here is Peter Pringle. We are going to hear him 2 more times in the course of this, and he comes with a very big caveat, but we're not going to get to that just yet. Just know that he has to play the scale right on this instrument because he has no other option.
Yeah, there's only one scale on this.
Right. So this is the only time, and I'll explain why shortly, but this is the only time that we will hear Peter Pringle perform on an ancient Sumerian instrument in a way that sounds like what ancient Sumerians definitely would have heard. There are reasons I still want to play pieces performed by him for you, and we'll get to that. But just so you know, like, this is the real deal. Like, that's what they would have heard because that's the tuning, that's the instrument. So that was the Silver Lyre of Also from this time period, we get some of the earliest sculptures and figurines of musicians, and I'm going to show you a couple of those real quick. I'm going to show Brody a couple of these real quick, but we'll cut the conversation out. You can just check out the links.
The music, what we know.
So we know enough about Sumerian music that I, again, have to leave out substantial portions. We don't have much decipherable music itself, but we do get tons of details from those roughly 100,000 surviving Sumerian documents I mentioned earlier. Music is discussed in sacred texts, instruction manuals, genre lists, song lists, and music theory treatises, to name just a few. Yeah, they did a lot. So yeah, we have a surprising level of knowledge considering how little we know about the era that came just before. These are some of the things that we know about ancient Sumerian music. We know about the music itself a little bit. We know specifically particular hymns. We know the notation that they used, although there's not a whole lot of it and there's a lot of variation within it. But the music theory also we know. Now, some of it we know explicitly from being written down, and some of it has been deciphered from working backwards from the instruments. We know many of the scales they used, and we know the one scale they definitely did not use. We know about the instruments. We know what they were made out of. We know how they were constructed. We know their melodic and harmonic capabilities. And we know how they were tuned. How about the musicians? Well, we know some of them by name. We know who they worked for. We know that there was a division of musical responsibilities across different employers. We have legit gift receipts from kings to the musicians in their employ. And finally, we have depictions of musical instruments and musicians. Now, we're going to hit on all of these, though not in this exact order, in a quick whirlwind tour of ancient Sumerian music. And let's start with the holy text.
Did the gods music?
Yeah, bro, of course they did. When do gods not music? Matter of fact, music not only played a prominent role in the sacred stories themselves, but was the central element in the performance of the narrative rituals spelled out in the holy texts. I'm going to give you 2 examples from the ancient Sumerian mythology, and I don't even need to look at this one. The first is called the Exaltation of Inanna. So Inanna is the goddess of love and fertility, and she is a badass. I'm just going to put it plainly. She's like the coolest goddess ever. I'm a total fanboy. But she decides that she's going to take a little trip into the underworld because she wants to get some mystical knowledge. So she goes into the underworld, and it has levels, and each time she gets to another level of the underworld, she comes to a gate, and there's a gatekeeper, and she has to know the mystical word to pass through the gate, but she also has to surrender up a piece of her clothing, And the idea is that she's surrendering up pieces of herself until by the time she gets to the center of the underworld, she has given up all of her clothing. And there's always, in different versions of the story, she dies in a different way, but she always dies and is resurrected in the story and returns with the mystical knowledge of the other side. And she did it because essentially she was bored that day and there was nothing else to do. And because she's Inanna, and that's how she rolls. But that doesn't make it any less heavy. In fact, one of the most famous songs in all of the Sumerian literature is the Lament of Ninshubur. Now, Ninshubur is another Sumerian goddess who is the constant attendant of Inanna, and she really falls apart when her bestie is temporarily deceased. And just like anyone would do when their best friend dies a violent death in front of their eyes, she breaks into a song about how sad she is over watching her best friend die horrifically in front of her eyes. But don't worry, this story has a happy ending because someone is coming to help. You see, Inanna's dad was none other than Lord Enki himself, the father of all the gods, or at least a substantial number of them. And oddly enough, for a male figure of these times, he was genuinely concerned about his daughter's well-being when he found out she went to hell, even though she was female. So he's like, he kind of was, he's like, and he has to run to the sun god Shamash, and he's like, sun god Shamash, my daughter just went to hell, I don't know what to do. and he's like, she just went into the dark city, and Shamash is like, don't worry, I have a solution for this. I've been in this situation before. What you need to create a eunuch. Because of course you do.
Quick, grab a eunuch.
No, you need to make a eunuch though.
Oh yeah, certain spells. Eunuchs are made.
Yeah, right.
They don't just pop out of the ground.
Yeah, I guess maybe a whole different context to that. Mm-hmm. I think you meant just like sprinkle goo dust on the ground and a eunuch appears out of nowhere.
Exactly.
But so the eunuch, what's the word I'm looking for? Compassionately.
Castrated into existence.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. Anyway,
Sorry.
Let's go. Anyway, so look,
yeah.
You need to create a eunuch, and you need to give the eunuch names of power. I don't know why it's a eunuch. They never tell you. It's stuff you'd know if you lived then, I guess. So they do the thing. They sprinkle the googie dust on the ground. They create the eunuch, and they give him the names of power. And these are essentially the names of gods and aspects of gods that are above the gatekeepers. So the eunuch basically uses these names to flip the game on the gatekeepers. Like, F you, I've got my own password, get out of my way. Because the gatekeepers hear the names and they're like, oh, okay, man, everything's cool, it's cool, we're just guarding the roost for you, go on through. And so finally the eunuch makes it to the center of the underworld, and he sees Ninshubur weeping and mourning and gnashing her teeth and so forth over the loss of her friend. And he's like, hey, don't worry, I've got this. And he walks over to Inanna's corpse, and he gets down and he whispers in her ear, and he says, hey, you know that secret knowledge you came down here to get? Well, here it is. And then he whispers all the names of power into her ear. The names themselves give her the ability to hear them, and she comes back to life through that, having absorbed those names of power and absorbed the essence and the powers of those gods. So now pretty much whatever god's doing what anywhere, she can be like, yeah, I can do that too. And that's just any old Thursday morning for Inanna. I would love to tell you so many more stories about her, like when she gets into a fight with a mountain, or when, during her descent into the underworld, she threatens a zombie apocalypse when they don't let her into one of the gates. However, we must move forward from the substance of Inanna's tale to the musical impact of Inanna's tale. But I do love the myth, and I do love Inanna, and I love what it symbolizes, and I love the fact that right at the beginning of history, we have this one moment where we have a goddess who is a complete awesome badass who is never subjugated by a male. She has a male lover, but everything's like on her terms. And you got to check out Inanna. But when she's at that moment at the pit of despair, when she's surrendered all of her power and everything, there's a lamentation sung by Ninshubur. And this is one of the pieces that we know was a popular text, and people wrote all kinds of settings of this text. Mm-hmm. So now, that said, the Exaltation of Inanna is the earliest literary work penned by a known author. Her name is Enheduanna, and she is a she. This is also another thing I love, is that the earliest known author, who, by the way, is also the earliest named musician in all of history, is a woman.
Wow.
So, ladies, I know you haven't had much through history, but you got this one.
You got that one.
You got that one.
Nice.
That's all yours. Earliest author, earliest musician, Enheduanna, and we're going to talk about her in just a little bit. But first, I am going to show you Peter Pringle's version of the first 12 lines of the Exaltation of Inanna. But, as I mentioned earlier, there is kind of a giant caveat that we have to bring up when we're talking about Peter Pringle. And we best get this out of the way now. So, Peter Pringle is amazing. He is to ancient Sumerian music what Wardruna is to Viking music. So, basically a knowledgeable modern-day musician doing a contemporary take on what he feels ancient Sumerian music should or maybe sounded like. And he uses this particular scale. I'm going to show you the scale that he uses, and I think you're going to recognize it. You know that scale, don't you?
I do. I cannot remember the name of it at the moment.
It is called the Hijaz Maqam in Arabic, but it is also called the double harmonic major scale, or as it is sometimes called, the Arabic scale.
Yeah.
Although technically there is a slight difference even between the Hijaz Maqam and the Arabic scale. I'm not going to go there, but point is this. This is what everybody thinks of when they think about ancient music of people who lived kind of near the desert. The Sumeria was actually in the middle of the Fertile Crescent, but there was a lot of desert land around. And you think about this area and you think about modern Iranian music. And modern Iranian music sounds like that.
Yeah.
Because it's using the Hijaz Maqam. It's using the double harmonic major scale. Again, you don't have to know what that means yet. We'll learn about it one day. But there's a bit of a mistake here in using it for ancient Sumerian music. Because I'm not going to go into it, but the punchline of it is this. That scale doesn't come from Iran. It comes from the ancient Greeks.
Ooh.
If you go to the medieval Iranian music theorists who are talking about how to learn to play classical Iranian music as they understood it, they were telling their students to go back to the Greeks, like Aristophanes. So this came from the Greeks, who may or may not have gotten it from the Egyptians. But the fascinating thing about this is that even though that might seem very culturally kind of sensitive, like, well, okay, so what we're saying that the Europeans get the credit for what we thought was Middle Eastern or Iranian music? Well, yes, but also there's another funny thing. The scales that we're using now and the scales that would become the ones that the ancient Greeks would use and that Pythagoras would use, they came from the Sumerians. So basically, if you go far enough back, the Western music sounds Eastern, the Eastern music sounds Western.
Wow.
They swapped identities.
That's very interesting.
They kind of swapped identities sometime around like the 2nd and 1st millennium BC.
Okay.
So now you know, with all that in context, there's a guy called Faria Faraj, and you should check him out. If you really want to know, he has a video called What Ancient Mesopotamian Music Sounded Like. And he's great. It's about a half-hour video. We're linking to that. And he goes into more detail about this whole thing with Peter Pringle. He's an Iranian. He absolutely adores Peter Pringle's singing because Peter Pringle is an outstanding, unbelievable singer. He can sing those melismatic, ornamented styles that Middle Easterners, like, that they sing. But not only that, but, like, he said, like, as a Middle Easterner, I'm freaking jealous of this guy. So, but that said, this is all to say before we play this performance. I just need you guys to know that you're hearing this for the spirit and you're hearing it for the words and the sound of the language because it's amazing, ancient Sumerian, but also because they would have still done ornamented styles in their singing, just not with this scale. So we will hear the scale that they would have used a little bit later. We've also heard one of them already with the harp that he played. But anyway, enough of that. Here is Peter Pringle playing the first 12 lines of the Descent of Inanna. Oh, and listeners, we're going to abridge that for you because the first 12 lines is like 6 minutes long. What do you think of that?
That was fantastic. Felt like I was listening to someone play a contrabass lyre.
Yep.
Just because of those really low tones that it was playing. That
I
was
knew,
fantastic.
I knew you were going to say that. And that's why I was still looking forward to this, because they had all kinds of different lyres, shapes and sizes.
Yeah,
you know?
right next to them, there was one about half the size.
Yep.
And
So we have iconographic evidence. That means evidence from the art from the time that, yes, they had all different sized lyres. And if you make a lyre that big, that's what it's going to sound like.
Exactly, yeah.
So yeah, they had bass lyres. And it makes sense. Listen, she's going into the underworld. You know, so...
Oh, yeah, that definitely felt like someone transitioning from the corporeal realm that we exist in into the underworld realm.
Yeah, there was such a contrast.
Wonderful to listen to.
Yeah, there's such a contrast between, like, his high, ethereal, crooning voice and then...
Ululation as well in there.
Yes. Oh, that's a word of the day. That's a $2 word right there. So, yeah, of course, the instrument itself was playing exactly correctly, but he was adding something from the Hijaz Maqam over top of it, and, you know, still sounded beautiful and inspiring, just as long as we know it's not how the music sounded. Okay, so that was a long caveat, but I think it's important because I know that it's important to modern Iranians, and so thought that I'd just draw a little attention to it. Next up, we have the myth of Enki and the world order. So, yeah, Inanna is not the only star of the pantheon, even though she may be the star of my heart. There's another myth called the myth of Enki and the world order. And in this myth, her father Enki actually does some pretty darn cool musical stuff. Like, he assigns different instruments to different gods. And as we'll find out soon, the different instruments have different, like, animal associations. So there's all these cross associations between the instrument and then the animal that the instrument represents, and then being like the voice of the god. This all goes back to the way that Enki created the universe. He doesn't give every god a musical instrument or a musical function, but you get this very clear sense that he's using these musical principles to create the universe.
Yeah.
So it's not just our awesome superhero goddess there, it's also like in the creation myth itself, which is probably where I should have started, but hey, here's where we are, you know? Yeah, the text also mentions the creations of songs and prayers for each god, highlighting the connection between music and the divine realm. You know, music and heaven, always a good pair. Later texts have some cool things to say too, like the Sumerian pantheon eventually evolves into the Babylonian pantheon, and one of the Babylonian creation myths, the Enuma Elish, talks about how the gods, after they created the world, they had a great big party and celebrated and most likely got drunk. So, you know.
What better way to celebrate after inventing music?
Yeah, what better way to... Oh, you know what? You got a great point. I was going to say, what better way to celebrate after inventing the world? But... They invented music before they invented the world, clearly.
Well, if you're going to have a little bit of a drinking celebration, you're going to need music for it. So you have to wait until after music is created.
They planned the party ahead of time. So.
Them Sumerian musicians.
Okay, but enough about gods. Let's talk about people. That's what we're really here for. So now, rather than just go through a dry list of facts, I got a fun idea here.
All right, what is it?
So we are going to walk through the life of a Sumerian classical musician.
Awesome.
From birth to death, basically, without going into all the little details about like Sumerian life itself, but we're going to go through what your life as a musician would be like.
Nice.
Yeah. And that's how we're going to learn a little bit about Sumerian music today, and we're going to take that right up to the instruments. All right, so a life of a literate Sumerian musician. The setting: late 3rd millennium BCE, somewhere in the Akkadian Empire. You are living in the golden age of Sumerian music. So now, depending on your social status, you may or may not realize that the musical world with which you are familiar is ancient beyond reckoning, but it is. In fact, your musical heritage is about 3,000 years old already in 2000 BC. Now, just to give you a little context here, our classical music only goes back to the 800s by the definition that we're following. This would be like if our classical music went back to King David in 1000 BC.
Wow.
That's like being able to look back on that length of a tradition and saying, here's where it starts. Now, a lot of that was passed down orally, but you would be aware that, I don't know if the common person would, but I'm sure there would be a general understanding that the musical tradition that you're a part of, that you've been born into, is very, very ancient.
Mm-hmm.
And you are one of those people born with that most fortunate of personality disorders, natural-born musicianship.
You got the bug, you got the musician bug. Like every generation of humans is going to have those people. Just like that's what they want to do.
And that's all they want to do. And because that's you, you have two potential paths before you.
First is the path of talent, and the second is the path of privilege. We're going to start with the path of talent. So at the path of talent, you were born to any family at all, rich or poor. And you're so damn good that your talent takes you to places that normal mortals just can't seem to go, especially if they are poor.
If you are poor, you nonetheless could have the opportunity to take it as far as becoming a member of the king's own personal musical entourage. If you are very, very good, and ideally the best at what you do.
So you could still wind up in his personal ensemble. It's a long shot, but if you're super good and you can get that message through to the right people, you can at least get a gig working for somebody important in the city. And maybe that'll be a jumping off point. It has happened in your history. Now, you are either born with your gift, or maybe you studied with a really skilled local singing master or TG player or whatever instrument of choice you play. And he or she saw some talent in you, and they trained you. Probably more likely to be male if you're male and female if you're female, from what I understand. And also, if you're a peasant female, you don't have a chance. You do if you're a rich female. You got a lot more opportunities, but we'll get to that. Anyway, you're exposed to all sorts of music all throughout your life, from official music of the temples that you hear all the time, performed by dedicated musicians, to the love songs known by everyone for their sweetness and universality. You may have even tried your hand at writing a couple of these yourself. Maybe that one day, a couple of weeks ago, after the weaver's daughter smiled at you when you walked past her. Now, about your heroes. You would have had musical heroes no matter who you were. Ancient Sumer was bursting with talent in those days, and you would have known the names and music of both local talent and what we would today call big stars. Now, of course, the big stars are going to be coming from the royal families, because how it went in those days. But there were genuinely seriously talented musicians from that royal family. So, for example, Inanna we mentioned earlier. So a little bit more about her. She was born circa 2300 BC, so a few hundred years before your time, but her music and poems have only grown more popular since her lifetime. They're huge in your day. Everybody loves Inanna. She was the daughter of Sargon of Akkad. She was a priestess, princess, and poetess. Very, very prolific. Sometimes wrote works about her father's accomplishments.
Kind of feels like shades of the Alexiad, which is a if you know kind of thing.
She also wrote several surviving song cycles to deities like Inanna that we heard earlier. Those lines were by her. And so that was one person that you definitely knew. And then, of course, you knew your king. your king, Shulgi of Ur. Now, he's your king right now. He's living in your time, so roughly 2094 to 2046 BC is when he reigned, and he's a little different than the average king. Shulgi is very cool because Shulgi is not only your king and therefore a god, but he is the patron of the arts who knows your value as a musician. He's one of the reasons that music is flourishing so hard right now because he loves it. Now, the thing about Shulgi was he bragged a lot, but he could probably back it up because he says things like when you read his writings, he says things that only like a real musician would say. Gotcha. like he would talk about how people often complain about the study of music being hard, but it was nothing for him because the love for it made anything that would have been hard just not be hard anymore.
Yeah, when it's a work of passion, it's not really work.
Yeah, and he would say things about how, if he had his choice in life, he would be a musician rather than the king. But since I am good at both, I will do both. Nice. Is like what he says. Yeah, he's really cool. You get the sense he was one of those kings that you'd be happy to live under. And
I don't want to be in charge of everything. I don't want to be a ruler. I just want to play my guitar.
I just want to play my lyre, man.
I just want to play my lyre and ululate to the sky, but I guess I have to take charge of everything.
Yeah, of the world's most advanced civilization ever. Oh, well. Well, anyway.
At the time.
But, but he was proud of that, too. He bragged about his king skills, too. So he was just on top of it. Anyway, he was a composer and instrumentalist skilled on many instruments, including, here we go, the Algar. I'm going to make you read it. Go ahead, Brody. List the instruments that King Shulgi was good at.
The Algar, the Cybiatum, the Miriatum, the Uzerbiatium, the Harhar, the Great Lion, the Dim, and the Magur.
Yes, and he was also a master of the compositional styles.
TG and Adab.
Oh, my bad. I earlier told you TG was an instrument. I never claimed to be an expert here, just being the messenger. But look, if you know what any of this stuff is, let us know on our Discord, which will be open by the time you get this episode. So, obviously, I can't find any musical reconstructions of any of his poems or compositions yet because this is all still developing. But here's what I think, right? I'll bet you on like a real chill day, he might just like break out his golden lyre with its 300 mother of pearl inlays and its 200 little lapis lazulis and then call his favorite flute player to come over and lay down some real soothing strains like these. Now, I know the first thing that some of you out there are thinking, wait, Ronnie, that just used the double harmonic major scale. He just tuned the lyre so that it would play that scale. Yeah, I know. But you know what? It's all right because it still sounded really, really cool and because he was still emphasizing what the lyre is capable of doing. Anyway, still, we're just going to say that that's what King Shulgi and his buddy were playing. That's, on a mellow day. But look, catch him on a party night or right before war, and he's going to be playing this. And you know what I've been saying? Like, oh, I'm really excited for you to hear these. Mm-hmm. This is why. This piece right here.
was fantastic. I love that so much. It just transported me to somewhere else. In my mind's eye, I saw an entire scene of people dancing and celebrating, whether it was like a positive or a negative thing. And there was dancing, celebration, lots of gold.
Yeah.
Lots and lots of gold.
This has a very regal kind of vibe to it, right?
Yes, it does. Like, that was what is played for the kings. That's the king's music of old. That was wonderful.
Yes. Now, a couple of quick things about this. Just like with basically everything that we're playing, just about none of this is quite on to what the music really probably sounded like. In each of these pieces, we get little bits that are things that they definitely did, little bits that are like, okay, this is this person's interpretation. This is probably for some people like, okay, that sounds really Hollywood. And, and in a way it might, because this would be just fine for Hollywood. If they did write a piece like this back then, and we found it, we could put it right into a Hollywood film.
And that means it's probably off by miles and miles. Not only does it use the ever ubiquitous Hijaz Maqam scale, but that beat sounds very modern. Boom, 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 boom.
Yeah, that's the part that feels very Hollywood to me. I don't think they would have had beats like that.
You know why?
To go along with this music. That's the part that feels like a modern interpretation of older things, because I feel like I said before, it would have been something more akin to a heartbeat.
Yep.
Yeah. And I don't think syncopation had gotten figured out yet.
Well, and the syncopation would have been there. We know there was a lot of rhythmic complexity among earlier cultures and among prehistoric cultures, but it's that there's certain types of beats that are just like, that's rock and roll. I'm going to tell you specifically with rock and roll, that's Bo Diddley. So,
yeah, you nailed it on the head there, bud.
It's the Diddley Stomp, aka the Diddley Shuffle, and it's bump, bump, bump. Bum, 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 bum.
Yeah.
So, quick shot of music theory here. Don't worry, it's an easy one. Both that piece and the Bo Diddley Shuffle are in 4/4 time.
4/4 is you have 4 beats per measure, and you use a quarter note to count beats. So 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, you can also split that quarter note in half into eighth notes. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then, of course, you can split it further into 16th notes, and you got 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4 and a. Or if you just count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So, you can count them. It's a little harder to do it that way, but there's a reason I did that.
And that is to show that you have 16 equal subdivisions of the beat. That's why we call them 16th notes.
Now you can count them 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, or you can count them 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1 and 2 and 3 and you got the Diddley Stomp there. You got the Diddley Shuffle. And the only other person that I have heard really do that at least in the music that I've come across throughout music history is Bartók, Bela Bartók, who is the Hungarian composer who loved those like 3+2 kind of rhythms and was getting that from like Hungarian folk music. But then again, if he's pulling that from Hungarian folk music, who knows? Maybe so could somebody from those times. In a way, it's not too hard to imagine just going bump, 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 bump.
And we are going to have to settle that discussion when we get around to his episode.
Yeah, right.
We're getting a little ahead of ourselves.
Bo Diddley. No, I'm sorry. Bo Diddley won't be getting an episode. Although you will be getting plenty of people who do have rock and roll crossovers. Obviously, Frank Zappa's getting an episode, but he's not the only one. So we'll get to that. They have to have a connection into classical music, though. So back to you, though. You know a lot of other names that are now lost to time, but like most everyone else of your time, no one's going to write down your name either. And anyways, amazing as you might be, you're probably staying local your whole life singing for your city temple. But hey, at least you've got a career in music. It's kind of like today in some ways. It might not be the career in music that you wanted, but it's better than not having a career in music, you know? So, that is the first path. Let's go with our second path.
The path of privilege.
All right, now look, here's the real secret to being musically successful in ancient Sumer. So, you need to make sure before you're born that you got to be born to rich and powerful parents. Okay? If you can be born to rich and powerful parents, you got a straight shot to all the best gigs in whatever field you want. You're going to have a good, solid core education that everybody gets, and then you're actually going to get to kind of specialize. So, Ancient Sumer was a total oligarchy, but they understood that you need to put people in the gigs that they're good at. Even if your talent pool is a lot smaller, because you're only going with royals and nobles, but damn it, they knew put people in what they're good at.
Yeah.
Which is really cool. So, okay, great. You are born filthy rich in 21st century BC Sumer. Let's party. So, funding for the arts has never been an issue in ancient Sumer, but especially not in your day. Even before King Shulgi, the government had a vested interest in cultivating music that showed off Sumerian splendor and prowess. Right back to coalition displays, you know? Still that we're coordinated, we're tight, this is who we are. And so for that, they needed ace musicians. Some folks are born with talent, like we talked about, but if you want to ensure that you have a unified body of skilled musicians capable of performing any genre in any ensemble setting, then you are going to need to make those musicians. And how do you do that?
Education.
Right. You invent the conservatory, duh. No, not really, but kind of. The schools in ancient Sumeria were called edubas, I think I'm pronouncing that right. Edubbas. Edubas. So the schools were called edubas, we'll go with that, and they were meant for training children of the elite to become scribes and priests, first and foremost. Now, I'm not sure if girls were educated in the same way, although I know that they did have education too. This is like the last period in history just before being a woman got in the way of everything. Mm-hmm. So at least in these days, you kind of, as long as you were rich, you could still do some cool stuff. But, that hasn't changed at all.
Nope.
So anyway, they also learned music, like legit for real learned it. Everybody at least learned some core things in music. And we have clay tablets of music tests that students took. So we actually know what they were being educated in. Yeah. So these tests would include questions on differentiating and identifying different types of instruments, also on singing technique, and in analyzing compositions. So yeah, conservatory students out there who might be listening to this, instrumentation and analysis courses, I think you guys know, are pretty fundamental to training composers today.
It's and you better do good on them. Otherwise, in another 2,000 years, a couple of dudes are going to have a podcast and they're going to talk about how you failed on your test.
That's right. Stay on top of this stuff because we keep even better documents than they do. Mm-hmm. But the point of that is to say that, look, this is what we learn. Like, this is composer training. You learn instrumentation and analysis. Those are two very, very core courses. And we might not all have to learn singing today, but you are expected to be able to play an instrument. Now, here's the thing with them, though, right? We've got other tablets, not necessarily the tests, but there are other tablets that suggest that instrumental training and choral singing were taking place in schools and also in some temples going all the way back to 3000 BC.
Now, these choruses would often be supplemented by various groups of instrumentalists, and it's very likely that some of the music performed was polyphonic. That means the performers would sing or play separate parts that were different from, yet complementary to, one another. Now, this should not be too shocking to us, nor should it be something that we read too much into. We often associate polyphony with Western music and Western classical music in particular. But I imagine that somewhere along the line in the 300,000 plus years that humans had been on the planet before Western classical music came along, that some smart people figured out that you can actually have two or more singers singing different notes, and, surprise, surprise, they'll sound very good together. Now, this becomes all the more likely when you realize the Sumerians had a notation system, which is something you really want to have when you've got multiple musicians doing different things. But it's also something we don't want to read too much into because polyphony of some sort was probably around from the earliest times, yet we suspect, without certainty of course, that most polyphony would have been fairly simple before the Western world developed a system of notation intricate enough to support multiple fully independent parts throughout the duration of an entire work of music. But such techniques as parallel and contrary organum, as we would later come to call them, were probably used. If you know what those are, that's likely because you are a musician or a music student, or both. And if you don't know what those are, we will be providing you with a very solid briefing in the not too distant. So, stick around for the main narrative if you don't think we suck.
Anyway, let's take a look at two areas of your education, your instrumental knowledge and music theory.
The instruments.
In general, There were a lot of Sumerian instruments, from lutes and lyres to flutes and reed pipes and percussion and all sorts of things that you definitely knew about as a music nut of your time. And you probably played a good lot of them. There's certain musical instruments that were associated with gods, as we've seen. And this is really neat because those instruments were seen as minor deities themselves. Like, the musical instruments were literally minor gods, because they could speak to the gods they were associated with.
Oh, okay.
So that's why you did your hymns and your praise and everything and your prayers with your music.
Okay, so singing and music itself was seen as a connection between this mortal realm and the gods.
Essentially, music is the language of the gods, and it's the power through which the gods created the universe.
Nice.
So certain instruments that are...
I could see that, yeah.
Remember we said Father Enki associated these certain instruments with certain gods, right?
Yeah.
So when you played that instrument, you were kind of in a little bit of awe and trembling and like, whoa, this is intense, because the spirit of this god is in this instrument.
Yeah.
Remember we were talking about the spirit of the reindeer and the reindeer toes and all this, and the spirit of the vulture. It's all continuing. Like, there's this continuous tradition, and now it's gotten to this.
Now it's finally reached the gods of the humans.
Yeah, the gods of ancient human societies are now the things that are being represented, not just represented, but that are living, and part of their essence is alive in these instruments. So you have a profound respect, especially for the ones that you know are associated with specific gods. So... yeah, you have more than just a collector's passion for your instruments.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, you're taking very good care of them. So look, sadly, we have time and evidence only to sample a few of these, and nothing is going to be completely spot on. Just like I said, a lot is developing. We're learning a lot, but we just don't have enough really great, accurate performances yet. But we'll work with what we got. So the first instrument, of course, is the voice.
Now, I know someone out there just called foul, or at least they should have if they're paying attention. Because haven't we been making a distinction between the human voice and the instruments that humans play throughout this series so far? Yes, we have. And there's a reason for this. Now, I know this next part is going to be a little hard to believe, but we are, in fact, a Rexipod. And we are going to prove that relatively soon. And as fans of the genre can tell you, Rexipods are anything but consistent. However, that's just me telling a joke. The real reason is that context is king. And in this context, we're talking about all music-making apparati. I think that's the word. And this includes yo mouth, which you will keep zipped for the duration of this episode. Thank you very much.
And singers were the most widely employed musicians. As we talked about before, there were a lot of local temple contracts that survived, like the one that was used to employ the poorer version of you above. And the musicologist Peter van den Merwe believes that the singing style would have had a pungently nasal sound. So this is the singing style of the temples, right? They would have a pungently nasal sound the pungently nasal sound of the narrow bone reed pipes that would accompany them. So he basically believes that the temple singing was like nasal and very kind of constricted in order to complement the reed pipes and everything. But when we really look into the text, it actually does seem to be that it depends on what the context was. So temple singing was actually like a lot harsher and more like percussive in ways, because there's this idea that you're making certain sounds that are supposed to be like very emotively jarring, and I'm not sure why, but the harsher sounds were associated with the temple singing. Whereas if you were going to be playing as a busker on the street, which they had, or if you were playing in
just in the town square amongst people in the public.
Yeah, or in their businesses, wherever it was, you were expected to play very beautifully and melodically. People wanted to hear, like especially with love songs, they wanted to hear beautiful lyric melodies. So just like today, people have tastes across the board. So realistically, it wouldn't have just been one kind of singing or another. It's just like today. And as a talented singer, you definitely have learned how to do both and more. You know, you've learned how to do a lot of different singing styles. Obviously, we don't have any surviving examples of any of this stuff, but I'm going to play you a piece right now that is completely going to violate what I just said. It's called The Raising of the Hand of Ishtar. So we're getting a little bit closer to like Babylonian times, kind of like right after ancient Akkad. But the ancient Akkadians would have known Ishtar as well. And basically, this is it's supposed to be like a temple hymn. The only reason that I'm playing it for you is just to give you like a feel for the language. But this style of singing is more melodic, so it might be something that you wouldn't have necessarily heard in a prayer like they're doing it here.
Gotcha.
This will also have a synthesizer, which is obviously not contemporaneous to the time.
Yeah.
And again, it's just what we have to work with this right now. There are going to be a couple pieces, I promise you too, though, that will come up a little bit later as we go. I've saved the most likely to be accurate ones for the end. Actually, more just kind of the way that it landed, but it's good because we will actually wind up in the end with something that sounds pretty close to at least some of the stuff that they were likely doing, kind of like the first one did. But yeah. What do you think of the language?
The language is beautiful. The only thing that didn't feel authentic in that was definitely the synth pad sounds that we heard opening it up. But everything else felt a bit more authentic. You know? The drum beat there behind it, that felt like something that I would assume would come out of music from that era.
The next instrument group would be percussion. There was tons of percussion. Like I said, they had shakers. They had these things called sistra, which are like the things that you always hear like in
those recreations of old temple rituals.
They had cymbals, they had frame drums, they had hide drums, many of which actually survive. But guess what? Still no sound samples. As far as wind instruments, well, not a lot of those survive, but you would have known tons of them, including variations on flutes and single reeds and double reeds. Basically, you had ancient flute, ancient oboe, and ancient clarinet. Today, we have two silver pipes that survive from Ur. They are each 24 centimeters long. They've got finger holes that line up that could be played together or separately. And here is what they sound like together.
Not gonna lie, that sounded like someone squeezing a whole bunch of those screaming chickens and them all going off at the same time. But that's just me.
Yeah, so this is the funny thing. A lot of these ancient instruments are a little bit raw too, you know, so.
That was raw, dude.
So here's another one. This is going to be, I think, a little bit less raw. This is those same silver pipes, but we're going to hear them played with a bone tibia as a kind of a bass instrument, which is kind of neat because the bone tibia and then these silver horns, you get a little bit of your Bronze Age and your Stone Age overlap. So here we go. Like that one better?
Very nice, yes. One of those flutes was completely set on being the drone, and the other one was carrying the melody. And they harmonized beautifully.
Yeah. I thought the first one seemed a little bit rough myself, but I like the fact that it's all kind of all over the place. But then when you hear what these things could sound like in context, they are pretty magical.
Yeah, they are.
So the last category that we are going to look at is strings. And of course, with strings, as we've seen, you would have had lyres and harps and psalteries, now you know, and lutes, now you know, because you didn't know those ones yet, but now you know. Listeners, you have no idea how much we're cutting out of this episode. We're a mess right now, but we're having fun. So look, so here's something, by the way. You remember that tortoise shell I told you that I cut out, the marimba, the one that you said was like really metal?
Yeah.
I realized I really probably shouldn't have cut it out. It would have made the episode like 3 minutes longer. Big deal. Because that instrument is kind of the ancestor.
So awesome.
First of all, it's so awesome. And second of all, it's the ancestor of a lot of these instruments.
Yeah.
So realizing that I actually kind of made a mistake by cutting it out, I'm putting it in this episode here. Would you care to hear it again?
I would love to hear it again.
Awesome.
Oh, yisanse namanje. Oyana galongana. Oyana ngelele. Sigisa galongana. Sigisa ngelele. Unengelele. Kulido bayaya. Uzela tulile. Kulido namanje. Uja batulile. Kulido namwebwa. Kulido namanje. Achilika nimehi. Sansanji sanse. Sansanji sanse. Sansanji sanse. Sanse galongana. Sanse gilongana. Sigisa gilongana. Oyana ngelele. Kanchilika nimehi. Uzuni watulage. Kanchilika nimehi. Uzela tulile. Kulido bayaya. Ugu watulile.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was cool.
That was so awesome.
That was really
I
cool.
love that track.
I want to hear that with distortion.
Right.
It would sound awful. It really would, but I still want to hear it with distortion. Yeah, that was worth hearing twice. So last time I played that for Brody, he was like, yep, need one of those all of a sudden.
Yeah, I really need one of those instruments.
Yeah. Okay, so that was the ancestor. And of course, that evolved into the Sumerian harp, which was then the ancestor of all those cool lyres and a whole host of other instruments we're just no way going to get to. These all would have used gut or silk strings, and interestingly enough, there are more surviving string instruments than any other instrument type besides percussion. And even within percussion, it's like we have a lot of the whole of percussion, but not specific instruments. So like we have in this case, though, I don't know if it was 2 harps and 9 lyres or 2 lyres and 9 harps, but we have 11 surviving string instruments, and that's what they are. Now, with the lyres that we have and the ones that we see in the depictions, it was supposed to be like representing the animal, right? So the body of the lyre was seen as the body of the animal, and then they would have the head of the animal. And there's one musicologist, I don't remember the name, but who actually thinks that the heads may represent the register of the instrument, with like the bull head being like bass, you know?
Yeah, that's
And
why
the-
there's different animal heads on them.
And the cow head would be like a tenor, and then like a calf would be like a higher, you know,
like a soprano.
like a soprano or alto, yeah.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so I mean, and it seems like they tend to correlate. Like the ones with the bullheads tend to be the bigger ones.
Huge.
Yep.
That was like the contrabass version of
Yep.
it, and then the cow one. That's smaller and smaller.
Yep, and that's borne out in the iconography. That's a term we're going to be using a lot in these early episodes, guys. Iconography just means the pictorial imagery that was left behind from people of the time. Get used to that term because it's going to be used a whole lot, especially in the Middle Ages and Renaissance. The cool thing about the lyre, though, is that it's light and versatile enough that you can play it seated or carrying it. And this is great because a lot of times you might be marching or just in a band that was walking. And here we go. This was here. So only 9 lyres and 2 harps survive today. So there we go. And we've heard a very resonant lyre, the Silver Lyre of reconstruction. But again, as we're now seeing, they're not the only ones. And there's certainly one that's quite a bit more melodic. And I'm not going to say anything about this. I just want you to hear it.
That was amazing. I love that performance.
That has, since my discovery of it about 2 weeks ago, become one of my favorite reconstructions or attempts at reconstruction of any ancient music that I've ever heard. I've thought about this a lot because I hear some things that remind me so much of modern, like harmony-driven music that definitely is not likely to be what they would have had, because they definitely did not have chords. Even if they had polyphony, they didn't have chords as we understand them. But they would have had sonorities and intervals that came together that, for all intents and purposes, acted as chords. Yeah, and certainly formed the scales, absolutely. Yeah.
including that scale we just heard, which is an Aeolian or natural minor scale. Now, some might dismiss that out of hand as a contemporary innovation, and indeed the temperament is contemporary. As far as I can hear, it sounds mostly equal-tempered with a couple of pure fifths placed strategically between certain string pairings. But the Aeolian scale itself is not necessarily anachronistic, because as we will soon see, the master scale of Sumerian music was some kind of modified major scale. And the Aeolian scale is just a mode of the major scale, which contains all of the same notes, but the root of the scale is on the 6th degree of the major scale, not the 1st degree. You don't need to understand any of that, but if you do, that's the situation. Just a different mode of a scale we know the ancient Sumerians used.
And so what we just heard is an actual replica of an instrument that existed at the time that would have sounded like that to ancient Sumerians. Everything we just heard that was possible for us to hear was possible for any ancient Sumerian to hear as well. That's a 5-octave instrument. This is a treasure, just so you know. We're coming to a point when we hit the Middle Ages, we're going to be looking at instruments that average 1.5 to 2.5 octaves. It's wild to see something with this much range, and to me, and I'll give you the mic in a second, but I just feel that it hits me in an emotional space.
Yeah.
You know, like pretty much none of these other performances have. And I know that like she didn't try playing any major or minor chords on it. She played everything that was like within the palette that they would have had, and absolutely according to the scale. That was nothing extra added into it. That was probably the most realistic to at least the scale and what was possible. What's your vibe from it, though? I want to know that.
Oh, I absolutely love this. That really did strike a chord with me.
Yeah.
So much going on with that. Loved it. The one thing that I do really appreciate about this, though, is this is the first time I've ever seen someone playing a stringed instrument with 2 hands, and they're doing a tremolo, but just with 1 finger. Like that tremolo note that was going as the continuing drone note. It was just 1 finger going back and forth rapidly. And like, I'm used to playing bass or guitar where you're going to use multiple fingers to do that. And that was just just blew my mind. And
she just did it for ages. She just kept like, that was like now I couldn't tell which finger she was using.
The index finger.
Okay. That's some serious...
And just back and forth rapidly doing that drone note perfectly in time while playing the rest of it and singing. Oh, that was beautiful.
Yeah. So when I said...
wonderful.
There were 2 moments when I was like, I'm really excited to show you things tonight.
Oh, yeah. Now I know.
Yeah. It was this and what we will erroneously call King Shulgi's Jam from here on out, because what else are we going to call that? But these are the 2. And I'm going to now read you the last little bit so we can wrap on up. Okay, so the last instrument I want to talk about is the proto-saz. The proto-saz is an interesting instrument. I don't know what they actually called it in those days. It was probably one of the instruments that was listed among King Shulgi's, among the ones that he played. But basically, the saz, it's like an instrument that's like sort of like a gourd with a bunch of strings stretched across it. You're going to see it in a second, or at least something in the saz family. It has a very long, skinny neck, tends to have sometimes 4, but usually just 3 gut strings. And it just has a very bright and kind of pingy sound, but can be very beautiful as well. These instruments could be played solo, or they could also be used to self-accompany. And I've decided that this type of proto-saz, what we're about to hear, this is your instrument. So as you've gone through your musical education and you've been trying different things out, you really, really took to this one, okay? Mm-hmm. And one of your favorite pieces to perform, one of your favorite pieces of epic poetry is the now very well-known Epic of Gilgamesh that was written 600 years ago, but everybody still loves it because time is weird back then and things last long. So
this was the Wonderwall of its day.
Yeah, it never goes away. And it's still with us today. But once again, I must warn you, it's Peter Pringle, and he's playing his Iranian scale. But also, because it's Peter Pringle, it's going to sound pretty darn magical.
Yep.
So here he is playing a little bit of the Epic of Gilgamesh, because there's no way we're getting out of Sumeria without hearing some Epic of Gilgamesh if we have it in any form. So here we go. So that's all we're going to look at with the instruments. Like I said, not a huge sample here, but we are going to obviously scatter more samples throughout as we move through. So for more knowledge, just consult the Wikipedia article I've been writing these last 10 minutes. I don't need to even go into that because we actually kind of covered a lot of things outside of it. So forget that. I'm just giving myself more editing work. This one's going to be this is like you know what? So now it's like, here's an example of when we're on for the most part, but
we're
still,
too on.
Yeah.
We're too on right now. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn it off.
Yep, but nobody else is going to know that at this point. Like, they don't need to know how many sections we're doing it.
Yep. No, they're not. Word.
Yes, they will. Because, as we mentioned in our update, we had no idea what a mountain of content we were sitting on. And so now we're splitting the episodes up even further so that each session corresponds with its own release. But fear not, for this episode is the exception, and we will be right back after this brief intermission with Saint Sebastian.
Well, should we call it there?
Yeah, we'll call it there. Absolutely.
Word.
That's where I took it up to.
Oh, God, I forgot to hit record.
Oh, yeah.
Nah, I'm fucking with you there.
I was waiting for it.
Oh, all right.
You wouldn't have said it like that. You would have been like,
Goodbye, everybody.
You would have been like, oh.
theory.
Sumeria is actually something of a big deal in the field of archaeomusicology because it's the earliest civilization in the world we know to have had music theory, as well as notation. And now that's interesting because, look, it wasn't 20 years ago. You could still find some fairly credible people making music documentaries that said things like, "Not a note of music has survived from the ancient world." And that was back when pretty much every conservatory student and everybody in any kind of music school in the West knew that the ancient Greeks had musical notation, all the way back in the 3rd century BC. But even then, they told us there was no surviving music notation any earlier than that. I mean, sometimes in a rare case, some textbook may have dropped a sentence worth of ink on the Hurrian hymn number 6, and then quickly tell us that it hardly counts because there are 5 bazillion interpretations of it, and just moves right on. But even then, there were amazing scholars who knew this was BS. Archaeologists, ancient language specialists, and musicologists have known of the existence of ancient Sumerian notation since the 1950s, and in the early 1960s, there had already been some serious leaps in our knowledge about the Sumerian music tradition. Now, music theory specifically. So what actually comes down to us about Sumerian music theory from the surviving texts and depictions and so forth? Well, it's not as comprehensive as modern music theory as you might guess, and a lot of it wasn't written down. And so we've had to piece things together from making sense of some of the writings about apprenticeship and so forth. But here's what they do talk about in the writings. These are actual subjects that get talked about. So first of all, tuning and instruments. We have tuning instructions for the harp and the lyre. Now, these varied, but most common was a 7-note scale, very similar, though not quite the same as the good old major scale. They also had names for their intervals, so the Sumerians used names such as Nigudu and Dudu to describe different... I know, it's like, you just can't say that with a straight face. Sorry, Sumerians. But, to describe different types of musical intervals. I don't know what either of those mean, but hey, they used them. So, melodic structure. Sumerian texts occasionally mention organization of melodic structures, but specifics are kind of limited. Also, rhythm and meter. While the understanding of Sumerian rhythm is a bit less clear than what we know about melody, which is also not terribly clear, we do have Sumerian texts that mention beat and time and the organization of time. They just don't explain it in a way that's really easy for us to make sense of today. That's more the issue. So, as you'll find out in a minute, even though we know what the scales are, we kind of don't-ish. Because we know what the intervals are, but we don't know how they tuned the intervals. We don't always know how they organized them. They might have been distributed in different ways on different instruments.
Gotcha.
So there's
a lot gets lost in translation.
A lot. And it's a shame because this is actually considered to be quite a treasure trove, what we actually do have. We have more knowledge about ancient Sumerian music than pretty much any of the other ancient cultures that are no longer with us. And that's actually ancient Mesopotamian music. I'm kind of using Sumerian loosely throughout this, also counting the Akkadian Empire that came right after, which is basically just a continuation. But it's, new management. Because that's always how it goes. So they talked about beats, they talked about time. We just don't know how they organized them. So performance and composition. All right, here we go. So Sumerian musical texts do provide information about performances and composition of music, but they tend to describe more the performance aspects than the actual composing aspects. So we actually have instruction manuals for how to sing, how to improvise, different things that you can do on the instruments. It's fairly detailed what we have. Again, it's just we don't know very well how to interpret the language that they're using to describe their intervals, to describe their scales and things like that. So a lot of it's just crossing things back and forth. So they've given us instructions, but there's a lot of disagreement on what those instructions actually mean. As far as composition itself, no, we have pretty much no detailed instructions anywhere about composition and how it was done. I don't know if there are any tidbits that show up throughout the Sumerian written record. I haven't looked into it that deeply, but from what I've been able to gather, there's no surviving compositional knowledge, so we can't use that to recreate the pieces. So while ancient Sumerian music theory provides some insights into the understanding of the music, the information is pretty limited and often requires a lot of interpretation. So I mentioned that there's like a little bit of scholarly disagreement on some things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is actually one area that I will go into just because it's kind of neat. This is a little bit of something for maybe you guys who kind of like the theory stuff, but not too heavy on that. Basically, the issue is there's a little bit of lingering contro on the tuning of the Sumerian harp.
For example, one of the main scholars in archaeomusicology during the 20th century was Dr. Marcel Duchesne-Guillermont. And Dr. Guillermont believed that the 9 strings of the Sumerian harp were tuned first in ascending order of pitch and then descending. So after string 1, strings 2 through 5 would go up in pitch, and then after string 5, strings 6 through 9 would go back down. Meanwhile, another scholar in the field who made breakthrough after breakthrough in her lifetime, and whose name we will be disclosing very shortly, believed that the strings were tuned in ascending order only, and in such a way that it maximized the number of pure fourths available on the strings.
Okay.
All right, so, this is kind of neat. So a neat little side note, they also have names for the different strings. So like one of them is called the reed string, and one of them is the flute string. And one of them is called thin, and some scholars believe that they're referring to the interval between that and the other strings being thin. So like from the 3rd to the 4th might have been a type of a half step.
Ooh.
Yeah. So, well, we know they had half steps distributed. We just don't know where, but this could be one of those clues that could be a spot where they put a half step.
Nice.
Yeah. And my favorite one is that one of the strings, and I think it was the 4th string, is called Ea made this. And Ea is the name of like the chief god above all gods, the god that creates all the other gods. So they're saying basically this string is so dope, God himself made it. Directly. No agency of anybody else. Just like, hold on, everybody step back. I'm making that one. All right.
Nice.
So isn't that awesome?
That is.
It's like you're going through the string names. It's like, okay, the deer string, the thin string, the flute string. Mm-hmm. God made this. It's like, I love it. It just shows that people could still be really blown away by something. Like, they're just like, whoa.
Yeah.
Like, that just sounds too cool. All right, so like ancient writings about the harp never go higher than the number 7. So this does suggest 9 strings or not, they were using a heptatonic scale. All right, quick little breakdown of this, guys, and we'll get into it a bit more when we get to medieval music. But we use these terms heptatonic, pentatonic, and diatonic a lot. So diatonic actually refers to the relationship between notes in the scale. If a scale is diatonic, it has what are called whole steps and half steps. And we'll get to that later, but basically means the whole thing is arranged in whole steps and half steps. That's diatonic. Now, kind of confusingly, when we're talking about pentatonic and heptatonic scales, we're talking about something else. Now we're not talking about the distance between notes. Now we're talking about the number of notes in the scale. So a pentatonic scale is a scale with 5 notes. A heptatonic scale is a scale with 7 notes. So it's a little confusing because we're using the same language to describe 2 different things, but just know diatonic is always about the intervals, and anything else like pentatonic, heptatonic, octatonic, so forth. These ones are all about the number of notes. So it seems that they had a 7-note scale. Now, which heptatonic scale it is again still being debated because we know what the intervals were between the strings. So like we know that there's a perfect fifth between strings 1 and 5, which was called nis. And then the major third between strings 4 and 6 was called mustu. Now here's a tricky part though. So they'll also have different names for the same interval depending on how it's tuned. So for example, like they have what we would consider a major sixth, but they've got 2 different versions of it. And there's one interval that they may have had 3 different sizes of minor thirds. So that's what I mean when I say like we know the basics, but there's still certain things that we don't really know.
Yeah.
You know?
That makes really trying to recreate their music very difficult.
Yeah.
Very difficult.
Yeah. I mean, it's nice that they left us with something, though, because as we'll soon find out, there are some cultures that have not left us with really anything to work with. So this is as good as it gets when you're talking about this far back. We shouldn't even have this.
I'm sure they left plenty, like everyone leaves plenty, but no one seemed to save any of it.
That's the issue, you know? A lot of things weren't considered important. And also, I think that even though we're 7,000 years at this point past agricultural revolution and everything, things did change slower back then, and there's still this apprentice thing going on because that's how knowledge had been being passed down.
Yeah.
So a lot of the stuff may be being written down, but it's not the primary way it's being communicated. It's still mostly being handed down as an oral tradition.
Yeah.
So, at any rate, go ahead, I'll let you announce this part.
The melodies.
So, the old view, consistent with outdated notions of unbroken linear evolution of humanity, is that there was an unbroken linear evolution of music. So, it started out really stupid and then got really smart, as we did. That's basically what people thought. At its most boneheaded expression, we find this notion championed by Kurt Sachs, that music started with one note, then two, then three, etc. Now, by the time Sumeria comes along, there was a pentatonic scale. But from there, nobody thought to count to 7 until the ancient Greeks came along. like this is really how his theory worked. It was like, okay, well, we would have started with one note, and then once we could comprehend and deal with that, then we would have added another one. And then as our minds became more sophisticated, we could handle 3 notes. It's like, geez, well, I guess the amount of time it took would account for all the notes we can now handle, right? So, by the way, though, it's ideas like this that kind of choked off the study of ancient music throughout the 20th century. There were a lot of musicologists who thought the further back you went, just like I said, just the dumber music got, and they thought it wasn't really that worth looking into. Obviously, this was right, because look at the music in the Middle Ages. Nothing complex there, huh? Hand a 5-year-old a crayon and a little bit of staff paper, and they'll compose you some Notre Dame polyphony every time. Guarantee it. So, you don't know why that's funny yet, but some people out there do. And you will know why it's funny in episode 40. So, anyway, now look, this is kind of cool. So listeners, as mentioned, we've been recording each episode across multiple recording sessions, and this is round 3 for the present episode. And the reason this matters is that while we've been away, I found more music. And Brody, this time, it's the real thing.
Ooh, actual music?
Like actual music that we can just about say, yeah, this is as close as anybody in the world has gotten to it. And I'll tell you why. Because this is a performance by none other than Ann Kilmer. You don't know who Ann Kilmer is, do you?
No, I don't.
Okay, not too many people do.
No, that's why I'm here.
Good, I'm glad I wasn't sure. No, nobody knows who Ann Kilmer is, unfortunately, unless you're, a nerd who's into this stuff. But Ann Kilmer was an American musicologist who made significant contributions to the study of ancient Mesopotamian music. And I am reading this from a script, guys, so bear with me. But hey, I wrote it out and made it funny. So anyway, Ann Kilmer was an American musicologist who made significant contributions to the study of ancient Mesopotamian music, particularly that of Sumeria. Now, her research focused on the decipherment and interpretation. I'm just going to skip that stuff. Let me just say this. So the reason that Ann Kilmer is important is because alongside Marcel Duchesne Guillermo, she is more or less the reason that we know all this stuff about Sumerian music. I'm just, without reading it from the script, actually, I'm just going to give you a quick breakdown. It's pretty basic. She was able to figure out, with a couple of other scholars, what the notation symbols actually meant. Like, she played a key role in deciphering the notation. So the reason that we can even kind of guess at what the stuff sounded like from, 2000 BC is because of her.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah, she knows her stuff. This is what she's done. She's considered the top expert in the field. Like 90% of everything that I've been able to tell you comes from the fact that she's done this research. And she's the reason, with that kind of translation and so forth, she's the reason we don't have to come up with these asinine theories about ancient people not being able to count.
So now we actually know. Thank you.
Yeah. And hold on, wait a minute. They could count to 7.
They could.
Yeah, they could even count to 9 because they had 9 strings on. And wait, hold on. Now, wasn't it it was weird to me because I feel like we've known longer than the 1950s that the Sumerians had some pretty sophisticated mathematics. And I just don't know how musicologists of the time, certain musicologists of the time, just didn't get that. But, that's neither here nor there. She also did a lot of work in instrument reconstruction and obviously developing ideas of performance practice. Yeah, so her research did lots. It did all sorts. speaking of which, go ahead. You say this part.
The songs.
And so, the truth at last. Or as close as we're ever really going to get to hearing what some of this stuff sounded like. And guess what? Praise the gods, they also gave us English versions. So we can hear some of these tunes first of all, we're going to listen to another excerpt of the Epic of Gilgamesh, because now we have something to compare the Peter Pringle with. So we can actually compare Peter Pringle's creative and expressively beautiful, but not really accurate style, and compare that with Ann Kilmer's interpretation. So this comes from an album simply called The Silver Lyre, and it is by Lorna Gouvier and Ann Kilmer. And we've linked to the playlist. There are 7 songs in total, and I highly recommend listening to all of it, but we'll show you a little bit throughout. So, all right.
Or patum salimtum Adad nabisha irtamama Shuladu khanishilaku inamari Ilaku guzalu shadu umatum Tarkuli iragal innasa
What's your initial impression of that, and how does it stack up against the Peter Pringle for you?
I like Peter Pringle a little better. Just gonna say that. I do like that though. You're right, we are finally getting around to actual music in a way. We're finally getting into what I would call a song.
Yes.
You know, besides that Peter Pringle thing, yeah, we are starting to get into music.
Yeah, like we're moving away from those museum pieces and coming into stuff that's really functionally music, you know?
Yep.
And, you know, there are other performances out there of Ann Kilmer with different singers and different players and doing completely different sounds than just this, of course, too. So in other words, don't judge everything by the one piece. But this is an example of taking a much more strict interpretation and going with what we definitely know from the scales. But this is why also Peter Pringle is so popular, because we've got like 4,000 years of being able to get whoa about it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if that makes any sense. It's like 4,000 years later, you look back and you're thinking this needs to sound ancient. This needs to sound like what we associate with that. So I get more of what I think of as Sumerian vibes off of him, even though I know that it's not accurate. So, all right, well, let's hear the English version.
A black cloud drawn. That inside it rumbles low. Shulat and Chanish in front they go, going as heralds over hill and Irgal rips out the mast of the sail. Loosing the dikes, Ninorta comes forth. The Inanna gods raise high the torch.
So how does hearing it in English affect the way you hear it now?
I get it. I get it now.
Yeah.
The dark tone of the music makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
I get it.
There's something ominous and intense going on, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe, again, maybe it's still not as exotic as we would like it to be. And maybe it was a lot more exotic. We know that there was ornamentation in the vocal lines. We know that people did do melismas and things like that. They didn't have to. You know, so like this straight tone singing would have been something that existed, but also melismas within like this type of scale. I'd love to find something like that, and I'm sure if I dig deep enough, I will. But this is what you would call a safe textbook interpretation, where we only go with what we have and no further.
Yep.
We make no assumptions. We just get real strict to what we've got. And that's the best thing to do in the beginning until you start learning more about a music tradition. For right now, that's where we are with ancient Sumer. I'm going to come back around to that in a second.
Specialization.
Anyway, there's your theory and a little bit of practice. All general stuff that every student would have learned to some extent. But for those seeking to become professional musicians, further tutelage was necessary and available. So there was a musical apprentice system that we talked about, right? Well, this system was centralized. So you had a chief musician at the top who corresponded directly with the king. There was also, this is a really cool one, there was a Chief of Lamentations.
What?
There was one guy in charge of all the sad songs. That was his job.
Oh, that's beautiful. Chief of Lamentations.
So, just a little historical fact, the earliest known emo was
This guy?
by royal decree.
Chief of Lamentations. You're the first emo dude. You gotta start the whole thing.
It's all downhill from there. Oh, man.
You look sad and dark and full of turmoil. You should be the first emo.
So, where was I going with that? Yeah, okay, no, it was a story. So, it's actually kind of made me think when I was 13 years old and I was really getting into the Smashing Pumpkins, because they were like the band that spoke to my teenage heart, and I wanted to get a guitar that would... Because Billy Corgan said he had one guitar that he thought was really good for sad tones. So I called Accent Music and I said that I'd like to know what kind of guitar would be good for getting a good sad tone. And so this guy puts me on with this other dude and he's like, hello. And I'm like, yeah, hello. I'd like to know what guitars make sense. And he's like, and he just goes, Gibsons.
Gibsons.
Like, okay, like what kind of Gibson? He goes, black ones.
Just black Gibsons.
Black Gibson. So, you know, of course at this point I'm like kind of thinking, is this guy messing with me or whatever? So I go, all right, so what about a happier tone? What would you recommend for that? And he goes, I don't know. I only know about the sad tones. So I just figure, like, when I think of the Chief of Lamentations, I just picture that guy.
Yeah, for sure.
Just like, I only deal with sorrow. But
It would have been great if he was like, pink Gibsons. A cheerful poppy sound. Pink Gibsons.
with rainbow bright stickers.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I want a real neutral tone. Gray Gibsons.
Yeah.
I want a guitar that's both sad and poppy and happy at the same time. Zach Wilde's black and white Gibson.
All right. See, I don't even need to make the jokes at this point. You're just entertaining yourself. I didn't even think the story was that funny, but you're getting a lot of mileage out of it. Mm-hmm. So, any old way. Look, the reason there was a Chief of Lamentations was actually because one of the central mythological stories in Sumeria, remember the
Exaltation of Inanna.
when she gets to the end, she dies. So there's the lament for her, and it's very central to this death and resurrection kind of winter, spring, just kind of seasonal fertility stuff. So it was all connected to that. And so they're lamenting over the loss of Inanna, but also other sad things that might have happened, and pleading with the gods to not abandon the city and things like that, which tells you how hard those times were. But look, the bottom line, you got options. But before you pick one, you might want to go ahead and lift up your loincloth and see, see what you're sporting down under, because that is going to affect your options quite a bit. Here's the deal. If it's an innie, you have a reasonable number of options at this point in history. If it's an outie, you have all of the options at this point in history, presuming, of course, you're rich in both of those instances. So you have some career paths, okay? Here are some examples of some of the gigs that you could have had as an ancient Sumerian musician. First of all, there is the Gala priest. Now, the priesthood was created by Father Enki to sing, quote, heart-soothing laments for his daughter Inanna. And this was probably exclusively female in its inception. And the reason we know that it was probably an all-female priesthood at first is because the wailing and lamentations were considered feminine things to do, first of all, so kind of a little good old-fashioned sexism creeping in. So, it should be women doing those things. But also, the prayers and hymns are in a dialect called Emissal, which is meant for communicating with she-deities, with goddesses. It's specifically a female divine language. So now this is a neat one, something that definitely resounds today, because another explanation is gender fluidity and third gender suggested by some, because in ancient times it was known that in many, many cultures, people who were not quite male, quite female, they kind of existed in this space in between, they were understood as being a third gender and were often looked at as the ones who were best suited for being the shamans and so forth, because it was considered to be something that was sort of like a gift from the spirits, or a signature that this is different than the average human.
Nice.
Yeah, so they had a concept of third gender, and we wouldn't necessarily say transgender, although maybe they had that, but they had that concept, and in the very beginning, it was quite a good thing to be third gender, because it meant you were probably going to be a priest, at least at some point. So we don't know how long it took, or if any of this is fully accurate at all. It seems to be it started out female. There may have been this third gender thing going on. Well, you know how it goes. Eventually it ends up all male, or almost exclusively male. The nice thing is that you don't have to be a Gala priest to participate in temple ritual, because instrumentalists were involved. And back to you, we haven't talked about you in a little while, right? But you actually served in this role as an instrumentalist when your music master suggested that you should develop some shem playing skills.
Shem playing skills?
Yeah, you need to develop your shem playing.
What is shem playing?
It's the playing of the shem.
Ooh.
Yeah, that's all I can tell you, because, like you, I have no idea what a shem is. And I didn't look it up, but you got to get good at it, so you better find out. Yeah, make sure you ask your teacher. Anyway, so here's what you saw every time that you went into the temple, all right? Mm-hmm. In the center of all the musicians, you saw a great big statue of the city deity, and that was in the center, right across from the Ninigizibara, which is a type of instrument that was always in all of the temples. It was like a type of lyre, and they don't know its significance, but that's where it was, right across from the deity statue. Now, the singers sat to its right, the instrumentalists, like you, sat to its left, and the female musicians all stood behind it. You did lamentations and prayers for the gods to protect and not abandon their cities, and sometimes the instruments themselves received animal sacrifices on behalf of Ea, the god of music and wisdom. So we're just going to say there was this really cool time when you got to make an animal sacrifice to this really cool harp, and then
I don't know if anyone was making animal sacrifices to the saz, but you're innovative, so you did that once too, and it worked. It helped you get better at the saz. So now you want to try the same thing with the shem.
So I don't know what you found. Maybe you cut a fat hog in the back.
Yeah. Yeah, we got all types of animals running around.
What do
Can
we want to
anything.
sacrifice?
I don't know. It all kind of depends on like the shem itself.
Yeah.
You know?
We'll have to look into that. That's a great way of sidestepping the question, too.
Yeah, like what is the shem? Like, is it a stringed instrument? That's definitely going to come into play. Is it a flute? Like, that's going to change what I'm doing.
We're going to have to look it up.
What is a shem? You know?
What is a shem?
Yeah, I just got to get a look at it real quick.
Let's just see.
Yeah, we couldn't find doo-doo.
Yeah, that's none of that stuff.
No.
All right, so
All right. You know what? Just make one up.
All right, here's my guess. It sounds, even though I know that the word sham has nothing to do with ancient Sumerian, but shem sounds like sham, so we're going to say it's kind of like a sham. It's a big horn that makes reedy.
Ooh, a big horn?
Yeah, it's basically a big horn that can play.
I'm going goat.
Yeah.
I'm definitely going goat on that.
I knew it.
You gotta sacrifice horns through the horn because there's other things with horns up there in the sky that control things. So we must appease them.
Yes, let's do that. We need to do that right now and right away while we're at it.
Now check this out. Hand me the goat.
This goat?
Thanks, appreciate it.
Sorry I'm late. Have I missed anything?
No. Nah.
Well, what are you doing with that goat?
I don't know. Milking it?
Moltar? Looks like he's milking it.
That was a lie.
How many times have I told you not to hang that giant beast head from the light grid? Take it home. Put it in your own house. It smells horrible.
Okay, I promise.
No, you don't.
Yeah, so you got to do that. You sacrificed the goat to the horn. But in the long run, though, you always really preferred the saz. That was what you were really, really good at. And even though there were sometimes acrobats and jugglers to come in to act out all the cool ritual stuff, you're kind of getting itchy feet after a while. You know, it's pretty serious business. And you wanted to get out and have a little bit of fun. It was cool. You got to meet Utu, and you'll never know this, but he's going to be a big deal in a couple thousand years, simply by being one of the named musicians in surviving administrative tablets. So,
bro, I got to meet Utu.
You got to meet Utu.
Way.
Yeah, bro.
Oh,
yep.
dude, I am huge these days. I'm huge.
You haven't even.
I'm rubbing shoulders with Utu.
You haven't even hit your stride yet either. You're just getting started. Okay, now look. Now that your apprenticeship is complete, you're meant to pick a lane and stay in it. So, well, you're not going to completely stay in it, but you got some ideas. So, we're going to survey your options. We just looked at priest, temple musician. You check that off your list, but you can also be either a poet, singer, a court musician, or a professional musician all around.
Let's start with poet singer.
These are the singer-songwriters of the day, aka the composers, because they were basically the same thing at that time. These cats composed and performed songs and epic poems like the ones that we were listening to. Like Enheduanna composed the
Exaltation of Inanna.
And whoever the guy was who wrote the Epic of Gilgamesh, these were such musicians. So these have been written, and you know these by heart. And look, you'd like to try writing a great poem, but you're not ready quite yet. You know, master the small forms first, right?
Yeah.
So you decide to take the route of the professional musician to just get a good, well-rounded experience, you know? These guys, these were the hired guns, just like today's professional musicians. They had the most diverse gig lives because music was their whole shtick. It was very competitive, just like today. The best musicians got the best jobs. And just like Berkeley students can empathize with, pro musicians were expected to have a primary instrument, no matter what their major was. You know, no matter what it was that they were doing, whatever their focus was, they still had to have a primary instrument. And you were known for your instrument. So you had to pick right because people were going to associate you as a player of that. You know, so now look, multi-instrumentalism was certainly there and it could open doors for getting better gigs because like, wow, this guy can play a lot of different instruments. But if they know you as a saz player first, they're never really going to know you as a shem player, no matter how good you get at it.
Yeah.
So it's still like, it's kind of like you have to declare at some point, this is my instrument. This is, no matter what, this is the one that people are going to associate me with. Unless you're just simply so much better than the competition at their instrument and you're that person who can just play everything amazingly. And it's just like, look, my sheer talent is going to make you change this rule. You know, because that does happen. Anyway, everybody knows you as a saz player. So you go out and you immediately land yourself a primary gig with a primary patron. This patron is your main employer, so therefore they are your first priority. You do have side gigs, they're permitted and even welcomed because your patron knows that that's going to help you improve your chops. You know?
Nice. I like that.
People seem to like actually get the value of music at these times. Like, oh yeah, you can actually go away for a little bit because we have a feast coming up in 2 months and I want you to be at your absolute best. So yeah, go play these other feasts. Have a good time. Drink one for me. Yeah. Look, so you do that. And look, the next couple of years, you get to play weddings, you're playing funerals, you're doing public festivals. You even fill in for some temple musicians when they're sick because everybody knows you at your local temple from those years being there. Urtu died, by the way.
No.
Yeah.
Urtu.
Yeah, he just died. So, you know, that was intense, but you got to play some music at his funeral.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was powerful. Nobody could see the tears, but you know. Anyway,
very sad for Urtu.
Yeah, but no, he's doing all right though. He lived a good life. So he's with the gods, so we're pretty sure of that. But look, okay, so while you're at it, you're gonna write a drinking song.
Absolutely.
Because, you know,
that's what our Urtu would have wanted.
That's what our Urtu would have wanted. We know he had a wild side. You gotta cut loose sometimes. So the nice thing about that drinking song is that it is also one of the Anne Kilmer and Lorna Govier songs. So once again, we will listen to it in its original language, which is actually Sumerian. So far, we heard the other one in Akkadian, which is kind of a successor language, but this is the actual original Sumerian, like we heard with Inanna and with Gilgamesh. And then we'll hear it in English.
Lamsare nig shahulhule ugerbal nige ametebi shagube nig kashsi sige amam dudu lamsarake bunin borban dulalake kashe 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 kash kashe kash kashe kash kashe 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 kash kashe kashe kash kash Duksik dag duksagia Shadingir zahu rabhune Gigakulum gime nam nam Shagakulum shame nam nam Emshazugur gurni bia shame.
Ready for that in English?
Yeah.
What is that, right?
Man, you know, you just throw little pop punk drums behind there and a little distortion on that lyre, dude.
Could rock.
That's the biggest hit of 2004.
Yup.
Oh, gockle that, oh, gockle that, oh, gockle that, lamsara vat. The gockle makes the liver glad, the lamsar makes the heart unsad. The ugur does suit the home when shagud jar is filled with foam. The jar does serve lamsar, the pails of reed come from afar. Kashe, 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 kash, kashe, kash, kashe, kash, kashe, 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 kash, kashe, kashe, kash, kash. To serve the beer of all the lands, these lovely pots stand on their stands. May your God's hearts upon you smile. Let Gockle's eye be ours the while. Let Gockle's heart be ours in truth, for it will profit both forsooth. Glad the liver, glad the heart, libate the brick a future part. Kashe, 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 kash, kashe, kash, kashe, kash, kashe, 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 kash, kashe, kashe, kash, kash. Foundation set for health and peace. Ninkasi's presence will never cease.
That was cool.
Did you like that one better than the Gilgamesh? Than their version of Gilgamesh?
Yeah, I did.
That's cool. Yeah. Do, re, mi, fa, sol, fa, mi, re, do. It's so weird. That's not what you think of. Like, you think it should sound like Peter Pringle.
Yeah.
But this is it. You go back far enough, and the Eastern stuff starts sounding Western and vice versa.
Nice.
So that is the major scale that we were talking about. That's the one that we're pretty darn sure of all the scales that they had, which means they would have had modes too. So you wrote that. You really liked singing Do, Re, Mi a lot, so you figured Do, Re, Mi is easy enough to sing when you're drunk, even though nobody has come up with the words Do, Re, Mi yet. Episode 7 for that. So look, you do a great job. You build up a solid reputation. You're known in all kinds of cities, not just your own. But look, your real dream in life has always been to become a Nar.
Nar.
Nar. That is a royal court musician. You know, you've always been a big fan of Shulgi. We talked about that. Not just because he's your king, just because he's freaking great. You've really looked up to him for a long time, and you'd love to meet him and to serve him directly. But look, just because your mom and dad matter doesn't mean that they just get to meet the king. You're kind of a minor noble anyway. But here's the thing, you're still a noble, and you're bound and determined. So it's time to break out that banger of a poem that you've been meaning to write. Well, maybe not an epic, but maybe just a really solid hymn. A hymn, how about a hymn to King Shulgi himself?
Yeah.
Maybe if I write a good enough hymn to King Shulgi, he will let me in and I can become one of his musicians. I just have to write a great hymn.
Yeah, that'll work. That'll get him.
Yep. And look, I'm not going to quote the hymn of Shulgi, but you can look it up. It does survive. You can read it for yourself. Okay, so there. You just wrote an enduring work of literature that will be discussed for the next 5,000 years, and you'll never know what you missed. But you're taking home big points in this life. You might not realize how many, but, you know, the gods will show you. But here's the thing, look, you don't really care about any of that because you just got your dream job. King Shulgi has heard your song, and he was quite pleased with it.
Nice. I'm glad he liked it.
He liked it so much, he said...
I wrote it for him.
Yep, and he said he wants to meet you.
Oh, I am so excited.
And it couldn't have worked out better. He says, let me hear you play the saz. And you play the saz, and he says, I've never heard anybody play the saz like that. I need you in my personal orchestra.
That's wonderful.
So you are now in King Shulgi's personal orchestra. This is what you've been wanting your whole entire life. You've done everything you can. You've built up your musical chops, and you have worked your way to this moment.
And now I get to look my mom and dad in the face and be like, hey, I'm tired of being the Chief of Lamentations. I am tired of that. And now I'm a Nar.
Yeah.
I'm the King's Nar.
I'm the king.
Okay. I'm the King's Nar now.
You can't tell me what to do anymore.
Can't tell me what to do. I know you matter. But now I'm the King's Nar.
All right, come on. We got to move on.
Moving on.
Okay, so he takes you in. You are his official saz player now, and you're going to be performing banquets and weddings and funerals like before, but now it's all connected with the king. You even got to go on campaign with him one time and see some war stuff, and you got to conduct the military band on the battlefield. So that was a great moment. At one point, you even got to write some battle music and conduct it during one of Shulgi's last campaigns. So you've seen a lot and you've done a lot. But now Shulgi's getting old. There's no need to announce that his son is going to be heir. We all know that the son of Shulgi is going to be the next king, but he makes it official and he needs some music for that. So you write the sequel to your big hit. You've already got one for the dad. Now we're going to write one for the son of Shulgi. And we are going to listen to that right now.
That was a good lullaby.
Wasn't it?
Man, yeah, that would be an amazing gift to get.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if it was performed like a lullaby, but we're going to say it was because you wrote that, and that's how you wrote it. And you know what I like about this? It's funny because there's something, just like with so many of these, there's something that feels like I know that they got right, and something that's kind of maybe slightly off, maybe. I like that it was diatonic. It's in the major mode, like it should be, and yet she's doing something that we haven't heard any of the other singers do yet, which is actual vocal ornamentation in the major mode. You know, like we've heard ornamentation in the Hijaz Maqam, you know, with the Iranian sound. But this might actually be, at least as far as that goes, a little closer than even what Ann Kilmer was doing, just because she's going for the safest bet, you know, but she also is one of the people who would tell you, yes, of course, there's improvisation in the singing as well. There was one little phrase that sounded really, really modern to me. It sounded like it would come right out of a Disney pop song. But for the most part, I can feel some truth in it. Yeah, so that was your big sequel. And everyone was surprised because the first one was a banger. And then this was like this real chill kind of lullaby. But you're like, yeah, man, no, it's definitely the sequel. So that happens, and like I said, King Shulgi's getting old, so he dies a couple of years later, and that was a pretty intense day. Once again...
No, Shulgi.
Yeah. At this point, pretty much everybody you know is gone, except for your 3 daughters. They're doing okay. You never managed any sons, but that's okay. You love them anyway, despite the fact that they really could have done better in picking a gender, you know. But, you know, we love our kids despite their faults, right? You know. Whatever. All right, but so look, one day, about 12 years after the death of King Shulgi, you finally find yourself at the very, very top. You are now the chief royal musician. You are the top dog in all of the land. So you have made it to the highest pinnacle any musician can hope to make.
Nice.
And then you get cancer. But nobody knows it's cancer yet because it's like, you know, the ancient world. And not too many people got it, but some people did. And they called it the consumption sickness. But here's the good news. It went away. You got better.
Ooh.
Yeah. But then you got run over by a runaway carriage the day you found out your cancer was cured.
Damn.
Yeah, so that's all right.
I'm not even upset, though, because I do love irony.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the way I would have wanted to have gone.
Yeah. Well, if we were Totalis Rankium, we would break out the irony gong now. So,
they have an irony gong?
They have an irony gong.
Nice.
Yes, they do. They haven't used it in a while, but they use it early in the series.
I love irony.
Yeah, so that's the irony. So you're better, you walk out, you're feeling great, and then the horses got spooked somehow, the carriage went flying, and you just got run over by horses in a 300-pound carriage.
Okay, I gots to admit, it has been bothering me ever since we recorded this, the way that Brody's character dies. I mean, think of the times. What will his enemies say? You know what they're going to say. Oh, the gods abandoned him. Oh, he never should have had that job in the first place. That should have been my job. Ha, well, I'm going to take it now. Yeah, love to see you try. But anyway, I came up with a solution. So there he is, all crumpled up in the street, skull smashed 6 ways from Sunday, and Out of nowhere, this mysterious lady walks up, and she looks kind of cool. She's kind of got this purpose in her step, and everybody just sort of seems to fall out of the way. And she walks up to the corpse, and she kneels down, and she whispers in his ear, which is still intact, "Hey, you know that secret knowledge that you've been looking for all your life? Well, here it is." And she whispers the names of power into his ear. And all of a sudden, just like nothing had happened, his skull comes all the way back together, his crumpled body gets all nice and good, and he stands right up. And he says, "My lady, I have been waiting for you." And she said, "Ha, I have been waiting for you." And they take hands and they stroll off into the sunset. And everybody goes, "Was that Inanna?" And she says her famous line that she once said to Dumuzi, because remember, she's a goddess and she can have multiples just like that. That's how they roll in the celestial realm. And so she says her most famous line, and if you want to know what her most famous line is, I can't say it on this show because it would take us straight out of any hope of having a clean rating. But if you look up the words Inanna, plow, and man of my heart, you will know what she said to him. And they walked off into the sunset, disappeared into the eternal sky, and one of his enemies was like, "Whoa, did that just happen?" And his other enemy was like, "If you're schizo, I'm schizo." And that was that.
So you're in the afterlife now.
Mm-hmm.
And so look, it's everybody
Do I
was,
still get to play music in the afterlife?
I would certainly hope so. That's it's kind of the deal all along. And you know, Father Enki, he said he made the world with music.
It's like I brought my saz, but they don't have strings in heaven.
Oh.
So it's actually hell.
So they have a big state funeral for you because you were high mucky muck by the end of it, and everybody knew who you were. So they have a big, beautiful state funeral, and your soul now goes on to party it out in the afterlife with Inanna and Dumuzi, and you will be playing music for the gods themselves, and with the gods themselves.
Nice.
Yes.
That's why I work so hard.
That's why you worked so hard.
Yep.
And we're going to see you off with one last piece that I have no idea what the funeral music of the time sounded like, but we're going to say that this is your funeral music because if they slowed it down just slightly more, like we'll imagine they did, then I think this has a very funereal quality. And this is, by the way, from the album Music of the Ancient Sumerians, Egyptians, and Greeks by the Ensemble de Organografia. They are a real academic ensemble specializing in reconstructions of ancient music. So again, this is going to be pretty academically textbook to the safe side of what we know they could do.
All right, dear listeners, like the gods of old, we have heard your cries for mercy, and we are making those same cries for mercy. Therefore, we're ending the episode now. Can you believe I once thought that we could fit the Neolithic, the Sumerian, and the Egyptian episodes into one? Well, I suppose these things sometimes happen when we are learning a new way to organize audio events across time, or at least when I am, because I'm having such a good time doing it that I sometimes forget just how much information I've actually packed into these things. I'm not apologizing for this one though, because it was a heater, and you know it. Now, just like last time, I would like to see you off with a little piece of classical music. However, since this episode has been so obscenely long, I'm just going to play you a 1-minute excerpt of the most famous Chopin Nocturne. And that, of course, is the E-flat major, opus 9, number 2. We will hear the first minute of the piece in lossless audio quality, as performed by Roland Pontonen on his 2021 EP containing just this nocturne. If you are not familiar with the piece, I would certainly hope you seek it out. It's a very lovely piece, as are all of Chopin's nocturnes. So, maybe in the interim between now and the next time we get together, go ahead and have a listen. And in the meantime, I guess all there's left to say is, Inanna.
Anyway, Peter Pringle
Pick the pepper.
Oh my God. Dude, wait, no. But, you know what, though? I've been trying the whole time I've been saying his name not to say that. So, it's a great name, though. It's like, he sounds like a Charles Dickens character.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Hello, I'm Peter Pringle. Would you care to visit my antique instrument shop? We have all sorts here. Might I interest you in a replica of the 9-string Sumerian silver lyre? Okay, anyway, poor Peter Pringle. You'd never know that I actually like the guy for all the... Big caveats, making fun of his name. I love him. So, any old way.